The voice came from somewhere behind her, sharp enough to cut through the string quartet and the low murmur of 200 conversations happening at once. "Excuse me, this is a private event." Serena Kwarteng did not turn around immediately. She had learned long ago that turning around too quickly was a form of answering, and she had not yet decided whether this particular conversation deserved one. The Hartwell Gala was held every November in the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont in downtown Toronto. It was not the kind of event where you simply showed up. The invitations were mailed 6 weeks in advance on card stock that cost more per sheet than most people spent on groceries. The guest list was curated by a committee that had been curating it, more or less unchanged, for 31 years. Serena had attended 4 times. Each time, she had worn something quiet and stood near the windows and watched the room the way she had watched rooms her entire life, carefully, from a slight distance, cataloging. She turned around. The woman standing behind her was perhaps 60, in a gown the color of champagne that had been made for her specifically, because nothing off a rack would have landed quite so precisely at that ankle. Her hair was set. Her jewelry was significant. Her expression was the particular expression of someone who had spent decades being agreed with. "I'm sorry," Serena said. "Your invitation," the woman said. "I'd like to see it." There were people nearby. Not close enough to intervene, but close enough to hear. A man in a tuxedo with the slightly glazed expression of someone on his third scotch. 2 women in floor-length black who had paused their conversation. A server with a tray of champagne flutes who had gone very still. "My name is Serena Kwarteng," Serena said. "I was invited by the Hartwell Foundation's board." The woman's expression did not change. That was the thing Serena would think about later, not the words, but the expression. Or rather, the absence of one. No uncertainty, no flicker of reconsideration. Just a flat, settled certainty that the woman in the deep green dress standing in front of her did not belong there, and that this certainty was simply correct, the way gravity was correct, the way the ground being beneath your feet was correct. "I'm sure there's been some confusion," the woman said. "Why don't we step over to the registration table and sort this out?" It was not a question. "There's no confusion," Serena said, "but thank you." She turned back toward the window. What happened next happened quickly. The woman's hand came around and caught Serena across the left side of her face. Not a full slap, not the kind you saw in films, but something deliberate and sharp and intended to instruct. A correction. The kind of thing delivered to someone who does not understand they are being dismissed. The string quartet did not stop playing. The 200 conversations did not halt. But in the immediate radius of where Serena stood, everything went quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when something has happened that cannot be taken back. Serena's hand went to her face, not from pain. The sting was minimal, but from the simple physical reflex of a person confirming that what just happened had, in fact, just happened. She looked at the woman. The woman looked back at her with the same flat, settled expression, as though she had simply corrected a minor inconvenience, as though the hand she had raised and brought down against another person's face was a reasonable instrument of order. "You'll want to collect your things," the woman said. Serena did not collect her things. She reached into the small clutch purse at her side and she took out her phone. Her name was Margaret Hollowell, and she was married to Robert Hollowell, and Robert Hollowell was the reason the Hartwell Gala still happened at all. The Hollowell family had been in Canadian real estate since before Robert was born. His father had built towers in Calgary and Edmonton in the 70s, and Robert had taken that foundation and turned it into something considerably larger. A development firm with projects in 7 provinces and a portfolio that was, by any serious accounting, worth somewhere in the region of $900 million. The family had been on the Hartwell Foundation's board since 1993. Margaret had chaired the Gala committee for 11 of the last 15 years. Robert was not a cruel man. Serena would think about this later, too. The distinction between cruelty and a kind of lazy, inherited permission. He had not been in the ballroom when it happened. He was told about it by a colleague named Warren, who had witnessed the moment and had said nothing, and was now saying something, which was its own kind of information about Warren and the speed at which certain social calculations got made. Robert found Serena near the east wall, where she had positioned herself with a glass of sparkling water and the particular stillness of someone who has decided to be entirely unreadable. "Mrs. Kwarteng," he said, "I owe you an enormous apology." "You do," she said. He looked relieved, which told her he had expected to be managed more. She did not offer anything further. "Margaret, my wife. She sometimes—" He stopped. "Tried again. She's protective of the event. She didn't know who you were." Serena looked at him for a long moment. "I'm aware she didn't know who I was," she said. "That's what I'd like you to think about." He blinked. "Mr. Hollowell," she said, "your wife struck me because she looked at me and decided I didn't belong here. That decision had nothing to do with an invitation and everything to do with what I look like. And I need you to understand that the reason you're standing here, apologizing to me right now, has nothing to do with what happened to me and everything to do with what you've just been told about who I am. Those are two very different things." Robert Hollowell was 63 years old and had been apologizing for his wife for a great many years. But no one had ever said it to him quite that way before. He stood with the look of a man encountering a simple truth for the first time and finding it unexpectedly heavy. Serena Kwarteng had grown up in Scarborough, in a house that was too small for the number of people in it and too cold in winter because her mother kept the thermostat at 64 to manage the gas bill. Her mother, Abina, had immigrated from Ghana in 1981 and had worked the next 35 years as a personal support worker. 12-hour shifts at a long-term care facility in North York, coming home smelling of antiseptic and institutional laundry, always with something left in her for her daughters. A question about school, a piece of fruit, a kind of attention that never felt depleted even when everything else was. Serena had been the one who stayed up late, who finished her homework and then started extra reading, who had a second notebook just for questions she hadn't asked yet. She won a partial scholarship to the University of Toronto and paid the rest with 3 jobs and a loan she spent 6 years repaying. She studied computer science when computer science was still a room full of men who looked at her, when she walked in with an expression she had come to recognize immediately. The look of someone calculating whether she was in the right place. She was always in the right place. She had founded Kwarteng Digital Solutions from an apartment in Kensington Market in 2003, on a laptop and a dining room table, and a belief that healthcare systems in Canada were sitting on data they didn't know how to use. She had spent the first 4 years being told that in patient data management, in health tech procurement, in the administrative corridors of hospital networks, all polite rejections in language that tried not to sound like rejection. She had kept going. She had built the platform, refined it, signed her first hospital contract, then her second, then a provincial health authority, then 2 more provinces. By 2019, Kwarteng Digital Solutions had contracts with 9 provincial health authorities and 3 federal health agencies. By 2022, the company had been valued, in a round of private investment, at just over $1.2 billion. She did not talk about this at parties. She had learned early that talking about money had a specific effect on rooms. It made people calculate, and the calculations they ran were not always flattering. And the results they reached said more about what they had expected before the number than about anything she had actually accomplished. She preferred to let rooms arrange themselves without that information, and to observe what the arrangement revealed. The arrangement at the Hollowell Gala had revealed what it had revealed. The phone call she made from near the east wall was brief. Her chief of operations, a man named David, answered on the second ring. He had been with her for 9 years and knew the particular register of her voice when she was calling about something that needed to happen immediately. "The Hollowell partnership," she said. "Pull it." A pause. "All of it?" David said. "All of it." Hollowell Property Group had been in preliminary discussions with Kwarteng Digital Solutions for 7 months. The deal on the table would have integrated Serena's patient data management platform across 6 of the Hollowell family's long-term care properties. A contract worth, in its full 5-year projection, just over $800 million. It was the largest single contract in the company's history. The Hollowell team had signed the letter of intent 3 weeks earlier. The formal agreement had been scheduled to be executed the following Thursday. David did not ask why. He never asked why in the moment. He said, "I'll send the withdrawal notice tonight." And Serena said, "Thank you," and ended the call. She stood by the east wall for another 40 minutes. She finished her sparkling water. A woman from the foundation's communications team found her and spent 12 uncomfortable minutes trying to express how deeply the evening's events were not representative of the gala's values, which Serena received politely and without comment. At 9:45, she collected her coat and left. The withdrawal notice landed in Robert Hollowell's inbox at 11:17 that night. He was still in the ballroom when his phone buzzed, still in the low-grade state of damage control that had occupied him since Warren had found him near the bar. He read the subject line twice. He excused himself and went into the corridor and called his general counsel, who confirmed what Robert was already understanding, that the letter of intent was non-binding, that Kwarteng Digital had every legal right to withdraw without cause, and that the formal agreement had not yet been executed, and so there was nothing to hold. He called his corporate development director. He called Warren. He stood in the corridor for 20 minutes with the phone in his hand, and then he called his wife. Margaret Hollowell picked up on the 4th ring. She was in the ballroom, near the dessert station, in perfectly good spirits. "She pulled the deal," Robert said. A pause. "What deal?" "The Kwarteng deal." "Margaret, do you know who Serena Kwarteng is?" She didn't, and he told her, and the silence on the line had a specific quality. Not remorse, not quite, but the first thin arrival of calculation. The reconfiguring of what the evening had cost. "Robert, I didn't know. I know you didn't know," he said. "That's what she told me." He hung up. The story broke 4 days later. Not because Serena had said anything. She had not spoken to a journalist, had not posted anything, had not returned the 2 calls from a Globe and Mail reporter who had somehow picked up a thread of it through a source at the gala. The story existed because 187 people had been in that ballroom, and some of them had spoken to their own lawyers and their own publicists and their own dinner party guests. And information like that, in a city like Toronto, does not stay still for long. The headline, when it appeared, was measured. The subheading was less so. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up nationally, and then across the border, and then by several international outlets that covered business and by several more that covered something else entirely. The comment below the Globe article that got shared most widely read, "Some people cost themselves more than money when they decide to assess another person's right to be in the room." Serena read it. She thought it was accurate, but incomplete. She did not comment. Her assistant, a young woman named Priya, wait, not Priya. Her assistant's name was Claudette. Claudette Forsyth, 26, 3 years out of Ryerson, faster at reading a room than anyone Serena had hired in a decade. Claudette forwarded her 49 interview requests in the first week. Serena declined all 49. She was in the middle of a product build cycle. The development team had been working on an updated interface for the provincial health network integration since September. She had 2 board meetings before Christmas and a pilot program launch in Nova Scotia in January. She did not have time to perform the version of herself that 49 journalists required. She did, however, respond to one message. It came not through her public-facing email, but through a channel that required some knowledge of her company's internal structure to navigate. And so she read it with the attention she reserved for people who had done their research. It was from a woman named Dr. Justine Olamide, the president of the Hartwell Foundation, who had been out of the country during the gala and had returned to find her organization in the middle of a situation it had not anticipated and was not handling well. The message was 3 paragraphs. It was specific. It did not make excuses. It named what Margaret Hollowell had done in plain language. It asked whether Serena would be willing to meet. Serena wrote back, yes. Wednesday at noon, my office. Justine Olamide was 58, a cardiologist by training, who had moved into health administration in her 40s and had run the Hartwell Foundation for the past 6 years. She arrived 7 minutes early, which Serena noted. She took her tea without sugar. She did not spend the first 10 minutes of the meeting managing the atmosphere, which most people did. I want to start by saying that what happened was not a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, Justine said. It was an assault. And it happened at our event. We are responsible for what happens at our events. Serena waited. The board has asked Margaret Hollowell to resign from the Gala committee. That's been done. It doesn't undo what she did, and I want to be clear that I'm not presenting it as equivalent. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know. What happened to the Hollowell family's board seat? Serena said. A pause. That's a longer conversation, Justine said. I imagine it is, Serena said. They sat with that for a moment. I'd like to ask you something, Justine said, and I'd like you to tell me honestly if it's not the right thing to ask. Serena nodded. The foundation is working on a digital health equity initiative. We're trying to build a framework for health data access in underserved communities across Ontario and British Columbia. We've been struggling with the technology side of it for 2 years. I've been familiar with your platform for some time. She paused. I'm wondering whether, in some other context, and at whatever pace makes sense to you, you'd be willing to talk about it. Serena was quiet for a moment. Not as a gesture, she said. I don't do partnerships as gestures. I understand that, and not in a way that puts my company's name adjacent to something still being sorted out publicly. Also understood. But yes, Serena said. In some other context, I'm willing to talk. The Hollowell family, for their part, spent the winter trying to quietly reconstitute what the autumn had taken apart. Robert brought in a crisis communications firm from Montreal. They advised a statement of accountability, which was issued 12 days after the news broke and was received with the specific skepticism reserved for statements of accountability that arrive 12 days after news breaks. Margaret Hollowell was not quoted in the statement. A spokesperson said she was dealing with a private health matter. No further comment was offered. The long-term care properties proceeded with a different health data vendor, a smaller firm out of Mississauga that had been a distant second in the original procurement process. The contract was signed in February. The terms were not disclosed, but people in the industry knew what the segment typically paid, and they knew what Kwarteng Digital typically charged, and the gap between the two was significant enough to have a word for it. The word was consequence. In March, Serena went home to Scarborough. Her mother was 71 now, and still lived in the house, with the thermostat kept lower than it needed to be. A habit so deeply set that Serena had stopped mentioning it. She arrived on a Saturday with groceries from the Ghanaian market on Lawrence, and spent the afternoon in the kitchen while her mother sat at the table and told her things about the neighbors and the church, and a woman named Mrs. Boateng, who had apparently said something interesting at the last prayer meeting. Serena listened. She made the soup her mother had taught her to make in this same kitchen when she was 9, modifying it slightly, because she had learned over the years that her mother would not say she liked the modification but would eat 3 bowls. I saw it on the television, her mother said, at some point in the late afternoon. What happened? I know, Serena said. You didn't tell me. I didn't want you to worry. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Outside, the light was that specific late-winter Ontario light, gray and flat and somehow enormous. Did it hurt? Her mother said. Her hand? Serena considered. Not really. You know what I mean. She did know. She thought about the way the room had gone quiet in that specific radius. The server with the tray of champagne flutes who had gone still. The 2 women in black who had paused their conversation and not intervened. Yes, she said. A little. Her mother reached across the table and put her hand over Serena's, the way she had done when Serena was 7 and came home from school with something in her face that she didn't have words for yet. You showed them who you are, her mother said. I showed them what I could take away, Serena said. That's not the same thing. Her mother considered this. Then keep going, she said, until they know the difference. Serena thought about that often in the months that followed. The distinction felt important in a way she hadn't fully articulated yet. The difference between being known for what you could cost someone and being known for what you had built. The Hartwell story had made her name more visible than a decade of industry conferences and procurement wins, which was its own uncomfortable lesson about how the world decided what it wanted to pay attention to. She kept building. The Nova Scotia pilot launched in January as scheduled. The Provincial Health Network integration updated on time in February. The conversation with Justine Olamide moved, slowly and carefully, towards something that looked like it might become real. In April, Serena hired 2 engineers she had been trying to recruit for a year, partly because the increased visibility had made the company easier to explain in a first conversation, which she found deeply ironic and used anyway. She did not speak publicly about what had happened at the gala until October, when she gave the keynote at a health technology conference in Vancouver. She did not mention Margaret Hollowell's name. She did not describe the moment in detail. She spoke about the pattern, about the accumulating weight of rooms that assessed her before she had spoken, corridors that redirected her, assumptions that arrived before she did and had to be dismantled one by one, and about what it cost to keep going through all of that and what she had built in the time it might have taken someone else to stop. Afterward, a young woman found her near the exit. She was perhaps 23, in the particular outfit of someone who had saved up for a conference registration and was trying to project confidence with the clothes she owned. She said she had been thinking about a health data startup and had been afraid it was too ambitious. Serena looked at her for a moment. Is the idea good? She said. The young woman said she thought it was. Then the ambition isn't the problem, Serena said. Start. She left the conference and went to her hotel room and ordered room service and answered 40 minutes of email and slept a full 8 hours, which she had not managed in several weeks. And in the morning, she was on the first flight back to Toronto, where her team was waiting and the work was ongoing, and the company she had built from a table in a Kensington Market apartment was still, 16 years later, the most precise and accurate answer she had to the question of who she was. Whatever anyone else had decided about her in a ballroom in November, that had not changed. It was not going to change.